right, we're getting to the end of another wonderful day. I want you to please welcome our next panel, one I know I will be watching very avidly, Managing Money, Making Meaning, moderated by Rebecca Jackson, COO of Go Girl Finance. Excuse me. We are also joined by Manisha Thakur, founder and CEO, Money Zen Wealth Management, Gail Cohen, Vice Chairman and General Trust Counsel, Fiduciary Trust, and Amanda Steinberg, founder of Daily Worth. Let's give them a warm welcome.
So, hello everybody. Thank you for sticking around. It's 4 p.m. on Friday, which obviously means it's personal finance o'clock. And if any of you were thinking of sneaking away, I would encourage you to stay because this is a foursome of financial fabulousness that's going to motivate and inspire you around money. So to begin with, I just want to set the scene that this is an unprecedented time for women's economic power. I'm going to say that again. It's an unprecedented time for women's economic power. Granted, there are challenges. We've got the pay gap to solve. We've heard of some of the other challenges, over the last 2 days. But women now in the US exert decision-making influence over $11 trillion of investable assets. In heterosexual relationships, we're increasingly the breadwinners, and by 2028, the average American woman is expected to out-earn the average American man. And yet, there's a bit of a confidence gap. Research is also showing that we're not kind of confident and comfortable when it comes to managing money. So I'm going to start with Amanda, because you've said yourself, prior to founding Daily Worth, you were great at earning money, didn't so much know what to do with it. Maybe you can talk to the disconnect for us.
Sure, and I'm still a work in progress. So I started Daily Worth, which is the largest financial media company specifically geared to women. We will have 1 million email subscribers by the end of the year. Thank you very much. I know, crazy. But when I started it 5 years ago because even though I was running a number of web engineering companies and making over $200,000 a year between tax bills and having bought too expensive of a house, my personal finances were still a disaster. And I was thinking, how is it that I work so hard to make so much money and I still don't have it at the end of the day? So I started reading MarketWatch, Yahoo Finance, you name it, and it just didn't really resonate with me, which is why I started Daily Worth, specifically to speak to women because I know that women weren't reading that material. But what I realized, especially early on, this is already changing fortunately, but in the earlier part of Daily Worth, 2009, 2010, women were still widely in a money coma. Even though we had more financial responsibility than perhaps we wanted in some situations, just even the idea of engaging with it in conversation was still really challenging for most women. So I feel like part of my job has just been kind of waking up an entire gender to a conversation which will ultimately bring enormous influence.
Well, I'll definitely share the point about the money coma because I had no excuse. I spent 10 years in investment banking and was a personal finance failure until recently. So I think that's, something that I think many of us feel. So we have a lot to do in terms of learning the language of money to really fully embrace this opportunity. Manisha, if you still feel that finance is like an ancient language that's been undecoded, where do you start?
Well, I think by not beating yourself up, because that's exactly what it is. I mean, I like to say that the default language of finance is male speak. And one of the things, I'm 44 years old, my husband's 20 years older than me, and so when we're out socializing with his friends, who oftentimes are 10 years older than him, they assume that I'm the second wife, and why didn't he get a skinnier, more glamorous version if he were trading up? And they start talking about money, like I'm not there, and I wouldn't possibly understand what they're talking about. But I went to Harvard Business School, and I used to run a $6 billion fund, so I know something. And so I'll listen to them, and it is as if they're speaking pig Latin at each other. It's one multisyllabic word after another, and they're not being used in context, and none of them are brave enough to admit that they can't understand what the other one is saying. So
you have to explain it to all of them?
What I want everyone to know is that literally most people, and even some people working in finance don't understand what exactly it is they're talking about. Good personal finance can and should be simple. And so I think the thing to know is, there's a phrase, there's no dumb question, but there really isn't. If somebody is talking to you about money and you can't understand what they're saying, the onus is on them to explain it more simply. And I'll tell you, I do a lot of financial media, and if I'm on CNBC and I get nervous, the first thing I do is default into babble speak. And it's because I don't know what I'm saying. And when I do know what I'm saying, I'm very clear. So my long-winded way of just saying, if you feel like you are confused and you're the only one who's confused, you are not the only one. And you will do people so much good by speaking up and saying, I don't understand what you're saying. Could you explain that more simply? You'll be helping and inspiring so many others to put it out there.
Okay, I'd love you to add to that, because
Yes.
you speak a lot about this as well, and I think there's sometimes a myth we need to bust as well, that sometimes people who have more money, therefore, have got it all savvily sorted out. So what do you see in your work?
Yeah, well, so actually I would second everything that was said. And in fact, my background is as a trust lawyer before I went into wealth management. So if you've ever gone to have your will done, if you think that the financial world speaks in babble speak, the lawyers love this. They speak in acronyms, basically. Grats and grits and cruts and crats. So it's crazy. And I would just reiterate, you have to ask questions. Don't be afraid. There is no stupid question. And if you're working with an advisor who is speaking like that and isn't taking the time or doesn't have the patience or doesn't treat you with the respect to answer your questions in a way you understand, you need to find a different advisor. I mean, that's the bottom line. And you can exert your power with your feet, basically, by walking out. So I think that's important. But I did want to just point out that when you're thinking about putting your finances together, you'd be shocked at how many people come to our office and don't have their estate plans in place or haven't even done a will yet. So I think that if we're sort of giving pointers about things to do, make sure that your will is current and is in place even.
Well, that's
very important.
A great segue into some of the other basics and fundamentals as well. I mean, for many people, the idea of doing a budget is no more pleasurable than going to the dentist for a root canal. I know you've got some strong views on this one, Amanda, so I'd love for you to share those.
Sure. Well, I was on Anderson Cooper earlier this year, and because there's a study that came out that only 30% of Americans actually keep a budget, which is and that's what's been fun for me starting a financial media company, not coming from a financial background, is I get to question all of the advice that seems to come out over and over again that people can't follow. Why is everyone saying create a budget when no one can actually keep one? And then I think about my life where, I'll go to Target or whatever and I'll buy groceries and household items, and then I look at my budget and I'm like, well, I've got this amount allocated to household items and this amount allocated to groceries, and then you're sitting there in Mint and you're trying to categorize stuff, and it's infuriating, and you're thinking, how is it that I even use this budgeting information to affect my spending decisions? It almost seems like this whole notion of budgeting is setting up most people to fail in terms of how our lives actually operate. So what I often talk about is that, yes, budgeting is still important, but there's a few things to remember. The first is just because you don't keep a budget the way traditional financial advice has told you to doesn't mean you're a financial failure. Because that's often why women in particular lose confidence. They're like, oh, I can't keep a budget. Money must not be my thing. I'm out of here. Remember that the ultimate point of a budget is so that you can save money. I know this is kind of hard when you're in New York City. But the point of a budget is so that you're not spending more than you make and so that you are saving enough. So budgeting is important, so much as so you set up and see how much your life costs. Because once you see how much your life costs, you're like, wow, this is not sustainable, and you can see how things are heading in the wrong direction or the right direction. For me, I realized that my life was twice as expensive as it should be, and when I started Daily Worth, one of the things I did over those first 2 years was move from a big house, a stupid house, into a tiny apartment, and just downgraded all these aspects of my life where then I suddenly had cash flow. I had an extra $1,000, $2,000 a month so that I was able to pay off that ridiculous tax bill and start kind of re-engineering my life in the other direction. But the most helpful thing to me is that Through budgeting, what I'm able to identify is how much I can afford to spend on anything that's not a fixed cost. And I actually transfer that to a separate debit account. So that's my way of budgeting. It's not about categorizing every single expense, which is often what you're told to do. For me, it's what are my fixed expenses, how much am I saving, and what can I afford to spend, and then I separate that spending money from my fixed expenses. And that's my version of budgeting. It's not the how much do you spend here and there, because that was impossible.
And actually, Manisha, this is something I'd love for you to add to, because you actually changed my views on this, because I've always looked at budgeting like I need to prison break from it. And you've actually changed my mindset that it's actually about financial freedom and thinking about the future. So maybe you can share that in case there's anyone else who thinks that a budget is basically just like being in a straitjacket.
I have this phrase that boundaries can set you free. And one of the things that I love about budgets is they give you some kind of boundary that you can then breathe into and optimize to find maximum joy. And what do I mean by that? It's like when you walk into a store and you have unlimited funds and there's unlimited things to buy. I don't know about you, but my mind starts racing. It's almost like sensory overload. And that's how most of us live every hour of every day, because no matter where we turn, there's so many things we can spend money on. If you use a budget in any form, and I love the way Amanda's thinking about budgeting because it's focusing on the outcome of a budget, which is being able to define what you can spend in different areas rather than the inputs, what you're categorizing and what software you use. But my point is, once I find that people pay attention and budget in whatever way makes the most sense for them, uniformly what I hear back is, wow, I feel a lot less stressed because I understand how much my fixed life costs me. And if I want to change jobs or not, I have a clear picture on whether that makes sense. And I feel really great because I also now have a clear sense of my play money. And when I go out, I see the number, and now I try and squeeze the most joy that I can out of it, rather than prior to having a budget where I just thought, oh God, I hope I'm not gonna get my card denied. And so it's this odd sort of conundrum that you get the most freedom by setting up some gentle boundaries. And I think the key word is gentle, and that's exactly what Amanda's speaking to. It does not have to be line item by line item to keep track. My favorite, and the last thing I'll say, my favorite rule of thumb comes from a book Senator Elizabeth Warren wrote 20 years ago, and it's the 50-30-20 rule. And she says, strive to spend 50% of your take-home pay on needs, 30% on wants, 20% on savings, and in high-cost areas like New York, I always modify that to say 20% on savings and or debt pay down. And broadly speaking, if you do that, that's about as detailed as you need to get 90% of where you want to go.
Gail, anything you want to add to that from your own work?
I would just say that from the women's perspective, from what I see, and I work with women who are typically older. Sometimes they've been divorced and they're working with a divorce settlement, or they're widowed and they have what's left for them. So they absolutely, they need to understand what's there. They don't have an income that they're out there making, and they can't generate more wealth, and that's it. So budgeting becomes really important, but again, very much in the way, we start with, this is what you've got, this is what you can afford to spend, and still have enough money to last your lifetime. And then let's work from that and figure out how that's going to be spent. So it's absolutely, even if you are in the money-making mode, and it could be a little bit loose, but once you're no longer, it becomes even that much more important.
So I want to get now into the more exciting part of this conversation, which is around the aligning meaning with managing money. There's been some interesting research coming out recently. I think Centre for Talent Innovation, showed that women, we want the same investment returns as men. We want to have good returns. But when we've satisfied some of that, we really want to be investing in social good. We want to invest in something that's of bigger purpose. You do some interesting work with your clients that allows them to really bring their children into that, and I thought that'd be a really great story to share.
Sure, I'd love to. So one of the biggest questions that we often get asked is about education and educating the next generation, even educating oneself. about financial matters. And how do you go about doing that? And specifically with families who are looking to bring their children into understanding money, they're often not willing to sort of open the kimono entirely and show them everything they have. What we often do is work with philanthropy because it allows the family to set aside a certain amount of their assets into either a private foundation, if they're that wealthy, or even a donor-advised fund that's a mutual fund-based donor-advised fund, and then work with their children on understanding the investments in that fund, explaining what the different investments are and why they're chosen, but even more meaningfully, also working on giving away the money, which is sort of a very nice way to have a family get together and family discussion, and often assigning, especially younger generation members, to researching a charity that they like and then making a case for why money should go to that charity in this giving round. So it's a wonderful way to, number one, educate about money, about financial literacy, but also about philanthropy.
Backstage, we had a little chat actually that referenced Sally Krawcheck's news. So if anyone wasn't here yesterday, Sally Krawcheck has now launched an index that invests in companies that have strong diversity, gender diversity in their upper echelons, which is very exciting. I know that's something that the two of you would especially like to talk about. So I'm going to start with Amanda and then obviously Manisha, please fill in.
Sure. So it's not every day that a woman in our circle launches a new fund to support other women. And what I'm most interested in it is that this is an index fund that Sally has created that I think because it's about investing in companies where women represent much higher percentages of the leadership and the boards than in others, that suddenly many folks who thought index funds and equities was just kind of like a foreign language are going to perk up and pay a little bit of attention. So I thought it might be fun for us to spend 5 minutes just saying, so what has she created? What does it mean? Really is just a teaching opportunity for us to all understand what it means to have an index fund. So I actually had the pleasure of interviewing Sally for about 20 minutes yesterday, and it'll be published through Daily Worth's email on Sunday, the full 20-minute interview. But what I learned about it, I said, so Sally, what is this fund? What does this mean exactly? And she said, well, we looked at all of the publicly traded companies, and we said, who are the ones that have the highest amount of women on their leadership and their boards? And she thought it was going to be these obtuse French companies that no one's ever heard of, but it actually turned out to be Dell and Yahoo and GE and a lot of the companies that are already make for great investments. And I said, okay, so how do we know this is going to be a good investment? And she said, well, the truth is that it's just launched, so we really don't know fully yet. We have to watch it for a while. But as it being an index, for those of you who don't know what an index fund is this is a fund that can make up part of your IRA or your investment portfolio. And it tracks the patterns of the market, which means it could go down and it could also go up. But it's not that there's someone sitting at a desk going, we should put this one in and that one and this one in, which is what is actually an actively managed fund, which is riskier in that it means that there's a human guessing about where the market's going to go, as opposed to Sally's fund, which is really just tracking the progress of the market itself. You can see when I started Daily Worth 5 years ago, I would not have been able to explain this. But I wanted to bring it up because I think it's really interesting that all of the companies that are in there have about 30% women either on their executive leadership team or in on their boards. And this is progressive because studies showed, that Sally explained to me, that women in these companies are likely to not have that huge wage gap as well, as long as there are more women in leadership. So the idea of putting our retirement and IRAs into funds like this is a good idea because it's going to help support women overall. That's the idea behind it. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, and what I've noticed is over the 23 years I've worked in financial services, I've probably given thousands of talks, and I've never yet once given a talk on investing where there were women present, where at least one woman didn't ask me about socially responsible investing. And I swear to God, I cannot remember a single time I gave a talk to a group of all men and anyone asked about socially responsible investing. And so it's been shocking to me that there is a clear difference in the way we think about wanting to make an impact on the world. Up until Sally launched her fund, which I think is a brilliant idea, I was actually very anti-socially responsible investing because I felt what had happened was that in most, not all, there are some good funds, but in most funds what would happen is they'd see the opportunity. Oh, these women want to do good. We can create a do-gooder fund for them. We can add a nice high fee onto it. And how will we figure out whether or not we're investing in companies that don't do things in the environment or aren't involved in energy or aren't involved in nuclear proliferation? And the way they do that is typically by using a computer screening service. So essentially what's happened is to all of us women who from our souls are caring about wanting to make a difference, a product has been created, socially responsible investment funds, with high fees and the decision on what is going in or not going in being made primarily by some kind of algorithm. And then to top it off, the worst part to me is that the way we're making our stand is by not engaging. So if I'm a large company, my worst nightmare would be to have a bunch of angry women owning my shares, because they might make me change. But instead, if you engage in socially responsible investing by not owning, you've just taken yourself out of the conversation. What Sally's done is game-changing, because what she does is harness our energy to want to make the world a better place, but in a way that enables us to say yes, that rewards being in the game, that rewards companies that are doing the behavior we want. And so I think it's a tremendous idea, and I hope it does really, really well. And I just think that, of course, it took a woman to come up with the idea, so go Sally.
And I would also add to that yeah, yay, that in terms of its prospects for doing well, that the Catalyst studies have shown that companies that have women leadership, larger women in leadership roles, actually do better financially than companies that do not. So it has very good prospects for success.
And I have to add one anecdote to this. Gail reminded me of something. Some of you may have read the op-ed back in the 2007-2009 crisis by Nicholas Kristof, where he questioned what might it have been if we had had Lehman sisters instead of Lehman brothers. I swear, every time I say that, there is like a guttural emotive response, and it is loudest in the rooms that are all male, because they know that it's right. And I think that there's really something to this level of female participation, and we've never really had a clear way that everybody can hear how strong it is, and an index fund definitely gives us a very measurable way.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And there are also, I think, some other ways as well we can think about investing in women, and especially investing in companies that employ more women. If you're an accredited investor, females have the opportunity to become angel investors. There's obviously a lot of opportunities and groups where people can do that and invest in socially responsible enterprise. And also just in like Deborah Jackson's Plum Alley, which allows you to support crowdfunding exercises for women who are forming new companies. There's a lot of ways to think about investment. It's not just about the return that you might get on your money, but also the return on society as well. I'm conscious that we've only got a few minutes left, so I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to leave some important parting words, and then I'll sum up. If you first.
So I'm happy to start. I'd just like to say just one or two things, and number one is information. Information is power, and one of the biggest roadblocks for women is that often they're shy about asking for information. And I think that women need to get more information. They need to be assertive about asking for it. And with that information, one can become savvy about the markets, savvy about their own personal financial situations, and will be better off in the end.
Definitely.
I have recently launched my own wealth management firm, and so I'm talking a lot about what are the things that every woman should know about her investment portfolio. And so I wanted to share with you the 3 things that I feel if you know this about your money, you're 80% of the way there. Number 1 is your asset allocation. It's the mix between your stocks and your bonds. And that is really powerful. That one decision probably will drive 80 or 90% of your performance. And you can think about stocks versus bonds as sort of how much you're pushing on the gas pedal for stocks and how much you're pushing on the brake for bonds. The second thing is what strategy are you using? Amanda referenced 2 very important words, active versus passive. I think about passive investing as driving in the right-hand lane. If it's your propensity to stay in the right-hand lane and wear your seatbelt, you might be more of a passive investor. Active investing is like the 16-year-old in dad's car, zooming in and out of the lanes, and ironically, most of the time, the right lane and the left lane car get to the red light at the same time. And studies have shown that oftentimes passive investing does outperform active investing. So what's your asset allocation? What's your strategy? Are you using an active or passive approach? And what are your fees? Fees, every incremental 1% extra in fees that you pay over a 30-year period eats up 20% of the value of your fund or your assets. So just those 3 pieces of information can really help empower you. And to this point that Gail brought up about knowledge and information, if you aren't part of the million women that are in the Daily Worth community, you need to be. So go check out Amanda's site, dailyworth.com. And you also need to check out gogirlfinance.com. If you read those 2 each day, and they're short, they're fun, they'll lift you up, they're spunky, you will be amazed at what you know by the end of 6 months. By the end of a year, you'll be giving lessons. And I mean that.
Thank you. I agree. So I'm actually going to close with a story. I was taking the train between New York City and Philadelphia, as I often do, my home and work. And I sat down next to a guy in a pinstripe suit. And I said, "What do you do?" He said, I'm the head of trust and estates for what is one of the largest banks in the world. He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I run Daily Worth, the largest financial media company for women." And he looked at me and he said, "Don't you to a certain extent just want to be taken care of?" Oh. And then, it just goes on and on. If we could only be here all day. But then he said to me, you know, it's a really good thing that the men who I work with leave their estates to their wives in trust so that they don't screw it up. So I just leave this with you, and I'm sitting here going, women are going to control 2/3 of the wealth by the year 2030. You know, I was like, it's my job to make sure that you don't think that about your audience, that we know what we're doing, because this is just too huge an opportunity for us to stay asleep. And our society has put us there in a lot of regards. It was not cool, it was not okay for women to engage with the subject of finance. It just was disruptive to relationships. But regardless, we find ourselves in this incredible opportunity right now, and the influence is ours. And yes, there is that resistance that we are still gonna face on a day-to-day basis, but it's ours for the taking, so we better figure out how to take it. We can do everything else, why can't we do this?
Excellent advice. So to sum up, just want to say it again, this is an unprecedented time for women's economic power. I really want to hammer that in. We clearly have some work to do in embracing the language of money so we can really step into the role of money managers in our own lives and also more broadly as stewards of wealth for society as well. I would personally like to implore the financial industry to lean into us a bit more. Women are always being asked, lean in, work hard, know this, create this skill, but hey, we're increasingly the creators of wealth, the owners of wealth. Time for you to come to us a little bit more too. Because if we can close this confidence gap and we can really step into that role, this is an enormous opportunity for the world, because we know that women want to invest in women, and we also want to invest in the world that we want to see. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you, ladies.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah, good job.